In today's game, we see Jose Raul Capablanca use a technique that Magnus Carlsen would later use to dominate the chess world. And the technique is this. I'll give you the technique so we can see it as we go over the game. And I'm paraphrasing Magnus here. I don't remember the quote exactly, but basically what he said was this, that people thought he won a lot of equal end games. But what those folks did not know, and even his opponents did not know, that those games weren't really equal. You may put them into a computer and it would say that it was equal, but he knew there were little advantages that he had that his opponent was unaware of. And this is a game where Capablanca does that exact same thing. The computers are equal for a long time, but for a human, it's much more difficult. This game was played in a simultaneous exhibition in Buenos Aires in 1914. His opponent is someone named Benito Villegas. Let us jump right in. Capablanca with white begins with d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, and e3. A very unambitious opening. The Kali system, basically just getting your pieces out quickly. Black replies with c6, a Slav structure. Bishop to d3 from Capablanca. And now bishop to g4, developing that bishop early. The only downside is that does leave b7 a little sensitive. So Capablanca plays c4, and he could at some point play queen to b3 and try to put pressure on that b7 pawn. Black plays e6, now knight b to d2, supporting the knight at f3. It blocks in the bishop, but he plans to develop the bishop after b3 on the long dark square diagonal. Knight b to d7, castles, bishop to e7, and queen to c2, controlling this key diagonal, potentially with play on the c file if that were to open up. And black plays bishop to h5. The idea is to play bishop to g6 and neutralize Capablanca's pressure on this light squared diagonal. Black has played well. b3 from Capablanca, preparing to develop that bishop. Bishop g6, bishop to b2, and those light squared bishops come off, and castling. And Capablanca has not gotten a lot out of the opening, actually. The one thing he does have is that he's going to be able to choose sort of when to break in the position with e4. And that will give him a little bit of space. But that's about it. Rook a to e1, preparing that e4 pawn break. Queen to c7, and now e4 is played by Capablanca. de4, knight e4 in their exchanges. He retakes with the rook. And bishop to f6. Black puts pressure on d4. And also there's a little pin here. This bishop at b2 would hang, so d5 cannot be played at the moment. Queen to e3 and c5. Again, Capablanca's opponent playing very well. This is a very common theme in this type of structure. The idea is to basically get white to trade off this pawn and reduce his influence in the center. And at the moment, the pawn is pinned, so Capablanca cannot even do that. But he plays a strong reply, knight to e5, and cd4 is played by Villegas. Now, here Capablanca does what he often does. At some point in his game, he will play a little tactical maneuver, a little tactical shot that gives him a small advantage, but it's enough of an advantage for him. And here he plays the move knight takes d7. It looks like he's losing his queen. Black cannot take that queen. If he takes the queen with the pawn, this is the response. Knight takes f6 check. Now that knight is taboo. It cannot be captured. If black takes it, then rook to g4 check, forcing king to h8, and bishop to f6 would be checkmate. Well, what then if black ignores the knight and just moves the king to h8? Then Capablanca would play rook to h4. The threat is rook takes h8 checkmate. And he still can't take the knight. That would still lead to mate. So h6 would really be necessary. But then Capablanca would have this idea. Rook takes h6 check. After pawn takes rook, knight to d5 with a discovered check against the king. He picks up the queen. And in this position, he would have two minor pieces versus a rook and a little bit better pawn structure. And white is better here. There's no doubt about it. Capablanca would have an advantage, greater than in the game. So because of that, his opponent, Villegas, goes ahead and takes the knight with his queen, but then bishop takes d4, and there are exchanges here. So after queen to c7, obviously his queen was under threat. So this is the kind of position we're talking about. This is the kind of position that when you put it in the engine, the advantage is smaller for white. But Capablanca understood a couple of things. First of all, he knew this structure where you have 3 versus 2 on the queen's side, and black, of course, has 4 versus 3 on the king's side, often favors the side with the queen side pawn majority. The reason is white can advance his pawns and not have to worry about his king's safety. Black, if he wants to advance his own pawns, he'll be removing the defense of his king. Also, it's easier to convert 3 versus 2 into a pass pawn than it is 4 versus 3. Now, today, that's not seen as such a big advantage, but at the time, it was considered a real advantage. But the key issue in this position, even more than the pawn majorities, is actually this open D file. If one side can establish firm control over that D file, they'll have a real chance at a winning advantage. So Capablanca sets about doing that. Rook F to D1, Rook F to D8, and now B4, advancing his pawn majority. He doesn't want to exchange on D8 because then he would lose control of the file. Rook takes D4, and now Queen takes D4. Capablanca has full control of the D file. B6 from black, trying to slow down this advance of the pawn. G3, now there won't be, Capablanca won't have to worry about any back rank mates now. Also, this queen can't hop into F4 and maybe some variations. Rook to C8 from black, attacking that pawn a second time, and Capablanca does defend the pawn with rook to C1. Now here he gives up the D file to rook D8, queen to E3, but his pawns are much faster. Black's pawn majority, of course, has not even started to move, and Capablanca is about to create a passed pawn here, even though he lost control of the D file. King to F8, C5, pawn takes C5, and this king to F8 move had one problem with it. He no longer is defending H7. So Capablanca plays queen to E4. He doesn't have to worry about this pawn because it's pinned. He's still going to be able to recover his pawn and make that exchange, but he moves the queen into a more aggressive position and threatens that H7 pawn. The best idea for black is, it looks like, was actually queen to D7, with the idea of maybe trading off queens, where a rook endgame might be more drawish, and advancing his own pawn majority after rook c5, f5, queen e5. He might have a move like queen to b7, where he's attacking the b4 pawn and actually threatening mate because the queen controls this diagonal. And black would be still equal there. Here he plays rook to d5, however, adding to the defense of this pawn. Capablanca goes ahead and takes that pawn, and now g6 is played, obviously preventing the queen from taking on h7. What about just taking the pawn? Well, that would lose immediately to this move, queen to b4, pinning the rook to the king, and Capablanca would win the rook, and of course the game would be over in that case. So g6, now he advances the pawn to c6, the king goes to g7. He feels, I guess, it's too dangerous to get closer to the pawn with all the possible tactics. Here's a very key variation. What Capablanca wants to do is this idea. He wants to play queen to b4 with the idea of advancing the pawn to, the queen to b7 and exchanging that off so the pawn will be only one square away from queening. However, there's a problem with doing that right now. After, say, e5, queen b7, queens come off, then rook to b5, and black can completely hold this position. This is actually an equal position. As far advanced as that pawn is, white can't win this against best defense. After, say, rook to c7, e4, king f1, rook to b2, and then just a5. And what ends up happening is the rook gets anchored on b4, and there's just no way for white to make progress, and this would be an equal position. So Capablanca, anticipating that, first plays a4. Now the rook does not have access to this b5 square, so this idea of playing the queen to b7 has become quite powerful because the rook can't move behind the pawn now. Rook to d6, however, is played in the game, and this is a blunder, but it's the kind of blunder you tend to make when you're under constant pressure. Eventually, you crack. I'll give you a second to see if you can find the winning tactic for white here. Okay, this is it. Capablanca plays the move queen to e5 check, and when the king moves to f8, he then plays queen takes rook check. And in this position, black resign, because when he retakes the queen, c7 is played, and the only thing black can do is just trade his own queen for white's queen and be down a rook. And that decided the game. Now, most of this game, computer C is completely equal, but Capablanca understood having that more advanced majority and control of that d-file gave him everything he needed to win this game. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. Hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon.